by thanking you all for tuning into this great program. It was one that we had been planning to offer this past spring and then had to shuffle things around. So we're glad that we can circle back and offer it in this virtual format. Before I turn things over to Chris, I want to first thank our nature program sponsors for their continued financial support of our programming, Ragged Mountain Equipment and Hancock Lumber. So we do appreciate their support. And if you want to help support Tin Mountain's programming as well, the best thing that you can do is to become a member. You can do that right on our website in the top right corner under Support Us. If you're not in a position, to join as a member at this point, you can also, just donate directly to our nature program series to help us keep them going. And just a few plugs for some other upcoming programs we have. Next Thursday, we have Dave Gavatsky presenting on Welcome to the Pyrocene. Look at the ecological implications of fire ecology and increased burnings, which should be great given his experience with the U.S. Forest Service, especially his time out west. And then the following Thursday, the 19th, we have Jillian Kilbourne from New Hampshire Fish and Game presenting on the New Hampshire Lynx population survey. So essentially, looking at the work that they've been doing, monitoring that northern lynx population. So a couple of great programs following this one. And because I see a lot of Bird Society folks on this call, and because we were just talking and planning about it today, I will put in a plug for saving the date for our, what I believe is our 32nd, but it could be our 33rd annual North Conway area Christmas bird count. We have set the date as Saturday, December 19th. I see a lot of veteran counters, and we hope that you will join us again this year. And if you haven't counted, I would encourage you to contact me at Tin Mountain and to join us in that effort, because it's a lot of fun and a great a great citizen science initiative contributing to a bigger database. So with all that, lots of exciting stuff happening at Tin Mountain this fall, I am going to hand things over to Chris. We are excited to have Chris Martin, the senior biologist for New Hampshire Audubon, here to talk about the state's peregrine falcon recovery.
Right. Nora, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity. This is the 40th year that New Hampshire Audubon's been involved in peregrine falcon monitoring. I've only been involved for 30 of those years. I see some people here who've been involved. There's a couple names, maybe even longer than I, with peregrine monitoring in the state. But we've got a lot to talk about, and I've got some great pictures, mostly taken by volunteers that I've worked with over the years, to illustrate some of the points I'd like to make. So I'm going to try to share my screen and then boot it up to regular PowerPoint here. Let's see. And is that working for everybody?
It is. Yep, we've got your peregrines in our
midst. That's great. That's great. Well, so here we go. Peregrine falcons are really super cool birds. I've been involved with working with them for many, many years. They're cliff nesters generally, although they recognize lots of our human structures as good substitutes for cliffs. They nest in cavities in the rocks, and they are excellent flyers. They're known as the fastest birds, maybe 200 miles an hour in a dive, but when they're flying steady, they may be able to go 60, 65 miles an hour. They are soaring birds, but also powered flight birds. They flash through areas you might not even recognize what you're seeing go by. They are bird hunters, and they catch most of the birds that they eat in the air. Here's a peregrine going after a flock of starlings. They oftentimes work in tandem with the male and female, both going after the same flock of birds to call out a vulnerable bird from amongst the flock. And while a starling is panicking and flying away from one peregrine, here comes another one in from a different direction and catches it. They strike their prey in the air. They don't pounce on it on the ground, like most falcons, but they sometimes they disable their prey in the air, but don't catch it immediately. It starts to tumble down through the air, and they'll circle back around and catch it on the rebound. Peregrines are very similar in size to pigeons, and in color too, and in shape as well. There's a peregrine in this picture picking out which pigeon it's going to go after near this church steeple. This is a picture from Nashua, New Hampshire. They really can fool you if you see a single pigeon flying. You might initially think it's a peregrine, or vice versa. They blend in quite well and are about the same size. Now, New Hampshire Audubon, in collaboration with Fish and Game and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, back in the days when peregrines were federally listed as endangered or threatened, have been training and deploying volunteers for decades now to go out and look at potential nest sites for peregrines. There are easily 100 cliffs and other structures that are suitable as peregrine nest sites in the state. The universe of possible nest sites seems to just continue to grow, not only with buildings and even things like cell towers, but the size of cliff that turns out to be suitable for peregrines seems to continue to decline, and so there are more and more possible cliffs. Road cuts, oh my gosh, quarries, all kinds of things are potential, and it's a challenge to even get to half of those every year to see if they're occupied. The good news is once they're occupied, they usually stay occupied, so we don't have to necessarily start from scratch each year. Once we got them, we seem to have them. There are probably 30 places in the state that have been documented as used historically before DDT caused the population to crash beginning in the 1950s through the 70s. And about 22 of those historically documented sites have been used since recovery began in the early 80s. Total of about 32 sites in the state have had breeding peregrines since that time. And if we're lucky, we find a new site each year. It's more like one every other year that we find. Let's see. I just have to give a shout out to all of our volunteers. In this case, Peggy Ackerson, who watches at Holt's Ledge near the Appalachian Trail in Lyme. Not every peregrine falcon watcher needs to plant themselves on the cliff itself to watch the birds. Holt's Ledge lends itself to that. Most people can watch these sites from below, and if you're fortunate, it's not far from the road. I know Ned Beecher's hiked in a number of times, at least 4 miles and up 1,000 feet to get to a site that he's familiar with, called Square Ledge near Mount Passaconaway. I think many people who've done this will tell you that looking for a peregrine falcon on some of these cliffs is kind of like looking for a feathered needle in a granite haystack. These cliffs, 400 or 500 feet tall with lots of granite ledges, you're looking for a gray bird that might be sitting still, could be perched in a tree, could be perched on a rock in the midst of the cliff. if they're not flying, it's hard to find them. If they're not vocalizing, it's hard to find them. This is Whitehorse Ledge, which you're probably all familiar with. Massive piece of rock. Those trees are all 30 to 50 feet tall, all those little green spots. So you can imagine what looking for a 1 to 2 foot long bird that's gray, what the challenge that presents. I'll give you one more example. Hopefully my cursor works. Here we go. We're going to go to Franconia Notch for a minute and look at Eagle Cliff. And I want to illustrate just how challenging it is to get sightings of these birds, especially when they're actually nesting. Because when they're nesting, they're quiet and they spend several hours sitting still and essentially trying to be out of sight. Let's zoom in for a second on the Eaglet Spire, which is up here at the north end of Eagle Cliff. And we're going to zoom in on the spire itself, which is right there. It's a much closer view of the spire. This is a steeple of rock, if you're not familiar with it, that is like a thumb sticking up from the rest of the cliff, freestanding. It's a pretty amazing piece of rock, but you'd be lucky to catch a glimpse of a peregrine at this distance from there. Let's zoom in some more. We've gone up the cliff and we're behind the spire now. And for scale, here's a rock climber. And there's a peregrine nest on this piece of rock, on this thumb of rock. Let's zoom in right on this area down here where there's a little bush. Now we're getting closer. The peregrine nest, in this case, is right here. No, right here. Again, there's a peregrine on that ledge, but you can't see it because it's sitting down low on its eggs and out of sight. Let's go even closer. Let's use our telephoto lens to zoom in. Okay, this is that same exact piece of rock, and this is the head of a peregrine falcon sitting on its eggs on that spot. A spot that actually faces away from the highway, so if you're trying to scan it from the road, you can't even see the bird sitting there, even with the telescope. You just got to cross your fingers and hope you see an exchange of the birds flying. So they don't always use the same ledge to nest in every year, which means you got to check a whole series of possible ledges. And we actually keep notes on all the different ledges that they've laid their eggs on. In some cases, there's 8 or 9 or 10 spots on the same rock face that they have used in subsequent years. Other sites, they use the same site year after year for 2 decades. It's highly variable. But there are some other clues that we can use when we look for these birds. I mean, again, look at this cliff. How are you going to find this bird here? You look for whitewash, which is their droppings. The places that they spend time sitting regularly accumulate whitewash. And this whitewash, if you find it on a cliff, it tells you that either peregrines nest there or ravens nest there, or perhaps both species nest there. And the whitewash, as it builds up, gives us some evidence that this is a spot that's being used regularly. It doesn't mean that the nest is there, but it's an indication that you've got residency of peregrine falcons or ravens. And if they're ravens, you find that out pretty quick because they're noisy and fairly obvious. Some of my volunteers have taken to using digital pictures and then putting their notes on the pictures so that when someone else comes to that cliff to follow up, they can find the landmarks on the cliff and zoom in on those spots and focus on where the birds spend time perching or breeding or stashing food. Now, this map of the state, this map is from 2019 rather than 2020, but the sites are the same. So we're going to pass that over. The data on the right is from this last year. We documented 24 territorial pairs of peregrines in New Hampshire in 2020, which is essentially the same as we had in 2019. An increase of 1 active nest. Those nests are active when we have evidence that they are incubating eggs. or more, hatching young or fledging young. So 16 of our 21 nests, 21 active nests produced at least one chick each in 2020. A total of 36 young fledged, which is the second highest number in New Hampshire we've ever documented in a given year. 2 years ago, we had 43. That's the only time we've had confirmed more chicks fledged than this year. And I'm going to move my thing because it's in my way. There we go. This is the history of Peregrine Falcon nesting success in New Hampshire based on data that Audubon and Fish and Game have gathered over the years. Even though there's a lot of variation in the number of young from one year to the next, and you can see in the last decade there's been quite a range from down to 15 young to up to 43. The general trend is continues to be gradually increasing. That's the number of territorial pairs, the number of active nests where we know that they've laid eggs, and the number of young produced. Every year is different, but by tracking this data for 40 years, you can see the progress that's been made in terms of population recovery. New Hampshire Audubon helps the Fish and Game Department with management of these sites as well, all throughout New Hampshire. One of the things that we do in certain cases where there's high potential for disturbance of nests is to appeal to hikers and rock climbers to stay out of a certain area at a certain season of the year, basically from April through June or July. And so these signs go up in those locations temporarily. They go up for, once we've confirmed that there's a nest at Cathedral Ledge, for example, we'll put the signs up in a limited area near the climbs that would be visible to those birds while they're on their nest, and leaving lots of the cliff available for climbers to continue to use. So we're trying to balance recreation and nesting success of this state-threatened species. Of course, we have to take the signs down again after the season is over, but we've had pretty good compliance, and a lot of times we've had assistance in posting signs, especially when they need to be posted on the cliffs themselves from the climbing community. Let's zoom in on this. So we try to have language that's going to work for whoever the recreationist group is that's there. So climbers are notable for all the colorful sorts of names they give to the various rock climbs. So the biologists try to speak their language and describe which rock climbs are the ones that are being closed, and trying to do that in a way that makes sense. And we usually post these signs right at the beginning of these climbs to help if there's any doubt about whether or not you're in an area that's temporarily closed. When you get to the base of that climb and start to set up your climb, you're going to realize that you're at the spot with the signage. We've had really good compliance, as I said, from the climbing community on this. Over the years, now 40 years, as I said, we've documented 313 successful nests out of roughly 443 pairs that have attempted to incubate eggs. Not all of our pairs do that every year, or we somehow miss the fact that they started and failed early. Our average over all the years has been around 1.66 young per nesting pair. In 40 years, less than 750 young peregrines have been documented to have fledged in the state. They're still a relatively rare species. I just love this picture though. This is on Cathedral Ledge. And how would you like to grow up on this 18-inch wide ledge, 200 feet above the ground? This guy here is very trusting of his nestmate. It would just take one kick and that bird could be on its way down. Some peregrine chicks do fall off their nest ledges. We do find some dead on the ground at the base of these cliffs, but it's quite rare. And these guys just have this sense, even though their balance is not great at this early age, three weeks of age, they have this comfort level with where they are that is amazing, really. I say that having been to a lot of these ledges myself with the help of experienced rock climbers, and I'm not comfortable in those places, I can tell you that. But working with the climbing community to band these young peregrine chicks has been a very valuable thing. It gives us a baseline for how many birds are on the ledge that we can then watch for the next several weeks and see if they all manage to learn to fly. It gives us data that we can use on dispersal and the reproductive success. And you can't underestimate, actually you can't overestimate how valuable this is as an outreach tool to work with the climbing community and others on a common project with the goal of getting as many young falcons produced from places that have oftentimes a lot of activity at them, and do it in a way that results in the whole cliff not being restricted for recreational activity. It's a win-win situation when that works. An example of this is I've worked with a climber, actually a series of climbers at Holt's Ledge over the years. This is on the Appalachian Trail in Lyme, New Hampshire, north of Dartmouth College. And at this site, we have to rappel down about 80 feet, starting at this point, starting at this point, but going to a cave clear down here at the bottom of the screen. You may have your view blocked by this little thing here, but once the climber gets into this cave, then the second climber, in this case myself, comes down and joins in there. What's challenging about this site is there's an overhang here. That means by the time the climber gets down here, they're hanging about 6 feet out in front of the rock face. And they literally have to rock their way like a swing and get onto that ledge and grab a hold of something and pull themselves in. By that point, you see the rope is actually being pulled into the cliff. So that's why the good climber goes down first. And then I'm fortunate enough just to follow them down on the rope. This is a photograph of part of Eagle Cliff in Franconia Notch. The highway is literally below the view of this picture. This is Profile Lake on the left side. Peregrines sometimes use old raven nests as their nest sites, especially in a spot where the rock is smooth and the eggs might roll off if there wasn't a basin or a bowl that they could put them in. So an old raven nest becomes a new peregrine nest. And what happens sometimes is the ravens build a new nest. The following year, the peregrines follow them and use that nest. And the ravens build a new nest or refurbish an old nest like this one and build it up again. Peregrines don't transport sticks to their nests. They utilize depressions, mossy spots, or old raven nests, which have a bowl structure. Here's a really freshly maintained raven nest at Rattlesnake Mountain in Rumney with 2 peregrine chicks in it. This is a great platform in what otherwise would not be a suitable place for them to lay their eggs. There was no flat surface here until the raven nest was built. Female peregrines in particular are very, very defensive of their young. They put a lot of investment in sitting through 5 weeks of snow-covered spring in these mountain areas to keep those eggs warm and hatch their chicks. And they've been, after that, investing more time in feeding them and protecting them. And when we arrive at these sites, these adult females in particular sometimes stand their ground. This female in Franconia Notch years ago was particularly notable for the fact that she refused to leave her nest when we would arrive to band the chicks, and literally put herself between us and the chicks, and to the point where we'd have to move her out of the way. Other peregrines are far less aggressive and will fly around, but will not actually put themselves right between you and their babies. So it's something you have to contend with when we're doing this work, is because in the midst of everything else that's going on, you've got to make sure you're being safe. You're not exposing yourself to those sharp talons, mostly with eye protection. That's probably the most important thing. Over the years, we've done a lot of work with banding, and we've actually collected peregrine eggs that have failed to hatch to do analysis of them. Let's see. We've actually had documentation in subsequent years of banded peregrines, sometimes a decade or more after we put the bands on the chicks. We finally recover an adult or get a sighting of an adult at its nest site, wherever that might happen to be. And we learn a lot about dispersal from that. We've also recovered a lot of unhatched eggs that we're able to do chemical analyses on. Let's show you some of this real quick. Working with our colleagues in the other New England states, we were able to report on band recoveries from the 80s through the 1990s in this paper, talking about the dispersal of peregrines. We've also worked with the College of William and Mary, who has an environmental chemistry lab, and on the concentration of PBDEs, which are flame retardants. And you would think that a wilderness type bird like peregrine falcons wouldn't be exposed to flame retardants, which is in our household items, our furniture, our computers. But the fact is that material escapes when these things are destroyed or burned in a landfill, or actually just the material, the bromine material, just off gases. And it's probably in your house floating around. That's a wonderful thought, isn't it? But it accumulates in the bodies of all kinds of animals. And in fact, peregrine falcons are among them. And when we published this information for Northern New England in 2008, the level of PBDEs in our peregrines was the highest ever documented for peregrine falcons anywhere in the world. I suspect, since this paper has data from many years ago, that no longer are our peregrine falcons holding the title of the most PBDE polluted peregrines in the world. I suspect that because this chemical is continuing to accumulate, that any more recent samples might reflect even higher amounts. So we do band these chicks when they're about 3 weeks of age, when we have the ability to do it. We don't do as much now as in the past, but we put these ID bands on with characters that are big enough to be seen in good high resolution photography or with telescopes. And we're able to document where these birds move to. I've worked with 42 different individual climbers over the years and participated in 182 different peregrine falcon climbs in New Hampshire. Most of those are to access living birds as opposed to collect dead birds or just eggs at failed nests. But 83% of all the banded peregrines in New Hampshire, 311 out of 376, have been banded with the help of rock climbers. The ones that haven't are typically ones where we can get to the nest by getting in an elevator, like buildings in Manchester, for example. Speaking of which, not all of our peregrines are nesting in wilderness settings. Cities are important sites for peregrine falcons throughout the US and the world. most of New England most big cities have peregrine falcons nesting in them now. The challenge for peregrines there is finding a suitable nest ledge. And biologists have learned that by placing a nest box in some of these sites, you can almost guarantee that the falcons will continue to use that relatively safe and dry location year after year. And that's a good thing. If they can have a dependable sheltered nest site, their success increases greatly. In Manchester, you're probably all familiar at this point with this nest site in the Brady Sullivan Tower near the Amoskeag Bridge. We've been fortunate for more than a decade now, nearly 20 years, in fact, to have a camera on this site. The folks who help us with the camera have continued to upgrade their system as technology changed to the point where now we have 3 different camera views of this one nest. And it goes directly to YouTube, basically. And you can tune in anytime, day or night. The camera's operating actually right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if you tuned in tomorrow morning. At least one of the adult birds is probably hanging out by the nest. They use the area year round. In fact, a lot of urban peregrines don't actually migrate away in the winter months like some of our cliff nesting birds do. I have to talk about this picture on the left here. This is a parakeet brought in by Peregrine Falcon pair in Manchester a couple of years ago now. This parakeet escaped from its owner's house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon one day. By 5 o'clock that same evening, it was food for baby peregrines. Peregrine falcons are expert at detecting birds that are in distress, lost birds, injured birds, birds that are migrating and tired. They recognize the vulnerability of those birds, and they preferentially pick them out as targets. This bird was escaped from a site about a mile away from the peregrine nest box, and in 2 hours was food for these baby peregrines. It was a difficult call I had to make to that parakeet owner. She had contacted us about it, and in 2 hours I had her answer for her. It was really not very pleasant to have to tell her about that, but that's the way it is. They pick out the vulnerable birds and use them to feed their young and give them every advantage they can. So as I said, banding peregrines in Manchester is relatively easy as long as you bring your key to unlock the lock on the padlock on the box. We pick them up, put them in a basket, and the great thing is we can bring them down where other people can watch us do the work. That's great. This year was a little different. We had to do it on YouTube. Nobody could come because of COVID, but sometimes we have 60 or 70 people leave their offices in the building for about an hour, take some time off, and come watch us band baby peregrines. These young birds, when they first fledge, don't always do well. Some of them get tired. Some of them hit the building. Some of them just can't quite get it right. They end up on the pavement, or worse, they end up on the road, which is very dangerous. And we tend to have volunteers that monitor fledging in our city sites to try to help these birds and intervene if needed to get them out of dangerous situations. Sometimes in Manchester, the animal control officer ends up with one of our peregrine chicks. Fortunately, they're all ID tagged, and those ID tags indicate that there's something special about this bird, even if the person that picks it up doesn't recognize what it is. And initially, they recognize that somebody's handled this bird because it has ID tags, and we were able to get connected to that bird again. Other times, situations not so good. Crash landing resulting in a compound fracture of a raptor's wing is usually a very, very bad outcome. It's tough for a compound broken wing to heal right, and for these young birds to then be able to fly again. It's happened on occasion, but this is a very bad situation when this happens. However, by x-raying these birds, we can find out sometimes that there's nothing more than a strain or a muscle contusion, and with little time, these birds can be brought back to the nest site again. Having peregrines with ID tags on them helps a lot. This young bird was down around Plum Island a couple of years ago in the fall, its first fall. You see, this is a juvenile peregrine with brown plumage and lots of streaking. This bird is only 6 months old at this point, but it had made it to December. The next year, at the same location, just on a different pole, the same bird, 17BD, was in adult plumage, and clearly this bird had made it. I believe this bird is now breeding at the Newburyport Bridge, right at the mouth of the Merrimack River, very near Plum Island. A bird that fledged from the nest in Manchester. So putting ID tags on all these birds is helpful, as we are able to track them for years sometimes as they settle in and raise their own young. Speaking of which, this one, 72AB, when he matured, he moved to Haverhill, Massachusetts, set up shop for several years on several different buildings in Haverhill, Mass, produced a number of young. Here he is as an adult on a 4-story brick building right in downtown Haverhill, where he bred for several years. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, he was found having been the victim of a fight with another peregrine, and we ended up finding him dead. But again, we knew who that bird was because of the 72AB code on his band. We have them nesting in Concord as well. We thought for a while we were going to have them nesting on our giant Christian Science Church steeple. Here's the peregrine blending in perfectly well with the ornaments on the steeple. That's a falcon. They know gray rock, and they blend in so well. We put a nest box there in that steeple, hoping to attract peregrines, but the birds had other ideas. They moved a mile up river to the Swenson Granite Quarry. Here's an incubating peregrine falcon right under an active stairwell on one of the ledges of the Swenson Granite Quarry. These birds used granite dust to create a bowl to put their eggs in. And those birds then, when they fledge their young, bring them to Concord's Horseshoe Pond on the north side of town, where the birds sit there in the shade trees and watch their parents hunting for ducks and other birds, killdeers and other birds in the agricultural field and the pond. Bridges are also potential nest sites for peregrines. The last few years we've had 2 pairs in Manchester, if you count this pair on the Manchester-Bedford line. Before they built the new bridge to the airport in Manchester, you used to go across the 293-101 bridge to get to the airport. And now under that bridge, we have a pair of nesting peregrines. It's not an outstanding bridge, it's only about 45, 50 feet above the water. It really is surprising. It doesn't have a high profile, but the peregrines have figured out that that's a good spot to hunt. They're about 3 miles away from the nearest other pair of falcons. We installed, with the help of New Hampshire DOT, a tray bolted to the understructure girders of the bridge. And here's actually a prey delivery. There are 2 peregrines in this picture, adult female in the background and the male with food in its beak. He's bringing food into the recently hatched young. We had success this year, despite bridge maintenance and construction work, in fledging 2 chicks from that bridge, one of which started out a little rough. It ended up in the water when it fledged and swam to shore, and the folks at the Manchester water treatment plant picked that bird up, saw that it was leg banded, and reported it as injured. After 3 days of checkups, we brought that bird back under the bridge again and released it, and it joined its other sibling that had fledged. And obviously you can tell this is a COVID year, 2020 like no other. But a few days later, we were able to confirm that it was doing well along with its nest mate, both able to fly and successfully learning how to survive in an urban setting like this. Again, one more urban situation. The Bow Power Plant. Smokestacks, big smokestacks are also suitable nest sites. Again, a good source of pigeons close by and gulls. And we put a nest box with the help of the power plant on this site too. Not only active quarries, but old abandoned quarries are suitable for peregrines. It doesn't have to be a really big one. If you've got a 40-foot rock wall and ledges on it, you might have nesting peregrines, which is the case in southwestern New Hampshire, in Westmoreland. I want to talk just a couple minutes, if I can, if I still have time left, about some of the other focused projects we've done. We've worked with a group called Biodiversity Research out of Portland, Maine, and another group called Stantec, a consulting firm that was involved in the in several of the wind power projects in New Hampshire, to do a study on nesting peregrines and how they use their environment. We were concerned about how often they use the areas where the wind turbines were proposed to go in. And so we wanted to get some tracking devices on some of these birds. So how do you put a tracking device on an adult peregrine falcon? Begin with, how do you catch one? The only way we could manage to catch them was a place we knew that they would go at a time we knew they would go there. And that is, we knew that when they had eggs, they would go to that nest. And so we would rappel down to these nests, put a noose carpet on the net. This is a metal reinforced ring with a whole bunch of slip knot fishing line nooses on it. We'd lay that on top of fake eggs after removing the viable eggs and keeping them warm and safe. We'd lay that on top of fake eggs that look just like the real thing and wait for the female or the male to come back to the nest. This picture is actually taken of the Rattlesnake Mountain female in Rumney sitting on fake eggs on top of this ring of nooses. We're waiting for her to shift position and get her toes caught in those slip knots. She was so comfortable there, she sat for an hour before that finally happened. But this is then how we are able to capture adult birds. Another site similar out in southwestern New Hampshire, we thought we were going to get there in time to put a trap in with eggs, but when we got there, we found that we had 4 tiny baby peregrines. And so after some quick consultation, we decided to bring 2 of the baby chicks up and keep them warm in a duffel bag and leave 2 of the chicks there to attract the mother to come back inside. We set down the noose carpet again. We caught the female. And while we were putting the transmitter on her, we had all 4 of her babies in a warm duffel bag, safe and well protected. So these little 12-gram transmitters are put on like you would put on a backpack with Kevlar straps that cross on the chest. These devices could stay on for years. In fact, we have one device on one female peregrine now that's been on for 6.5 years, and it's still giving us information on that bird's whereabouts, even though the bird has shifted from one nest site in Rumney or in Kilbourne to another nest site at Holt's Ledge in that intervening time. We track her to Pennsylvania each winter and back each spring to New Hampshire. This is the how we kept those chicks warm while we were taking care of this bird. This process takes about an hour of time. Then we put the chicks back on the nest, and then we release the adult falcon and watch to make sure she goes back to the nest. I have a sequence of about 6 pictures here showing her release after she got her new transmitter. Here we go. Took her about 5 minutes to settle back in her nest after we let her go. That bird we were able to track and have tracked for several years from Fall Mountain near Bellows Falls down to the coast of Connecticut and right at the Rhode Island, Connecticut line, where that bird spends the winter months. So I just tried to give you some examples of the different aspects of our Peregrine Falcon monitoring and management efforts that we do with Fish and Game support and with the support of funders like the Door Foundation, who's our current funder for some of the work we do, and with the support of not only donors, but with volunteers that help us in the field. I can't say enough about the dedication of folks who've volunteered over the years. I know several of you who are listening have been involved in that effort, either in the past or in the present, and we sure appreciate that. There's no way to get to all these places without your help. And I hope that being out in the woods and doing something that gets you exercise and gives purpose to your journey to these cliff sites has been rewarding for you guys as well. In my mind, there's nothing better than a task of going out, finding a comfortable rock where you can view a cliff and just sitting back for an hour or two prior to the black fly season and enjoying the woods and watching, seeing all the wildflowers that are popping up at the same time. I have to say that later in the season, when the mosquitoes and black flies come out, there's a little less relaxation involved, but I appreciate all the help we've gotten over the years on that project, as well as from so many different rock climbers who have assisted with this project over the years. It's great to have that kind of teamwork, and it's made all the difference in the work that we've been able to accomplish, not just in New Hampshire, but my colleagues in the states of Maine and Vermont and Massachusetts as well. We're all very grateful. So I'm going to close the show here. I appreciate your attention. I know I haven't covered everything, and I suspect you'll be able to help me cover some of those things with questions. Again, I just want to acknowledge that so many of these pictures are also donated by volunteers. And this is a local shot for you guys. This is the female in North Conway, showing actually curiosity about us while we were on her nest ledge. She would actually sit there and watch us while we would band her babies after she'd already attacked us. When she got tired, she'd just sit and watch. Here's to Cathedral Ledge. So who's got questions?
Well, Chris, it's Charlie. If everybody's being shy, I have almost
Hi,
have
Charlie.
a non-bird question. When you rappel down to the nest, you then rappel all the way down to the base of the cliff, or do you work your way back up?
Well, the strategy depends on the site. Every one of these cliff sites is different, and the first order of business when we get to one of these places is to assess what the right strategy is. Typically, gravity helps us, so we'll start at the top and rappel to the nest and then continue on down. It's also typically the speediest strategy. Climbing up cliffs is oftentimes a long process, but we've done all those things. Sometimes it's go back up afterwards because what's at the bottom that awaits you at the bottom is not pleasant. But typically it's start at the top, go halfway down, stop at the nest, and then continue on. So it's quite a logistical adventure.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have one, Chris. Where do peregrines go for the winter? Did you say, I heard you say Pennsylvania, just, that's it?
Well, no, I didn't mean, I meant that one goes to Pennsylvania.
Right. But I mean, I was surprised. I would have thought that they would go much further.
So there's a principle in migratory biology that the animals or the birds that nest farthest in the north oftentimes go the farthest south for the winter. They go, whereas ones that are nesting in temperate areas, say at 45 degrees north latitude, oftentimes only go down to the Gulf Coast, depending on what species you're talking about. Peregrines are not all migratory in the same way. Some stay put for the winter. Some migrate to New York City or Chesapeake Bay for the winter. We have two different female peregrines from our tagged birds, our transmitted birds, that have ended up in year after year in the winter months in eastern Pennsylvania. Their annual distance that they travel to their winter home is about 250 to 300 miles. And we've actually monitored one of these birds coming back in late February, getting all the way back to its nest site in New Hampshire, finding difficult weather conditions and apparently maybe not finding its mate around, turning around, going all the way back in the course of 48 hours
Wow.
to eastern Pennsylvania, waiting another week, and then doing the trip a second time. Something we'd probably never, ever know about if it wasn't for the fact that they're sending location data.
Yeah.
So, so the ones that we've tagged in New Hampshire have gone to Pennsylvania, the coast of Connecticut, and then one in Portsmouth that doesn't go anywhere at all.
Oh,
It stays put all winter in Portsmouth. Pretty modest or moderate climate there too.
Yeah.
But the males and females don't necessarily do the same things either. They don't go together. One might even stay where the other one migrates. So.
And when they migrate, they end up in one location for months then in the winter?
Well, I'll use our one that's been on the air for 6 years as my example, because we have more data on that bird than anybody else. That bird has gone to the same winter area each of those 6 years, an area that's probably 40 by 40 miles square in Susquehanna River Valley. Year after year after year, never really varies. And if you track the routes, they're oftentimes overlapping one year to the next. So what puzzled me was this bird actually switched breeding sites in the spring and summer about 3 years ago, moving from where we captured her to a different site about 40 miles away. But she's come back to that site again for 3 consecutive years. So interesting stuff. Who else?
Chris, I just have not necessarily a life history question, but a feeding one. Do peregrines ever prey on like mammals and like small mammals on the ground, or are they almost exclusively hunting in flight birds?
Hunting in flight is typical. There is one mammal that they catch regularly, though. Well, not one, several species probably. Like bats need any other problems right now.
Oh,
Peregrine
jeez.
predation. Peregrine falcons do catch bats, and they do bring bats in to feed
Wow.
their young. Peregrines are crepuscular as well as daytime hunters. And in cities with lots of ambient light, there's evidence they're actually bringing things in occasionally at night as well, if the opportunity presents itself. Young peregrines oftentimes train for their ability to capture prey on dragonflies. So in the summer months when dragonflies are all over the air going after their prey, young peregrines are oftentimes learning how to capture prey by going after dragonflies. That's one of their first things to attack. It's extremely rare for peregrines to pick stuff up off the water or off the ground. It happens. Might be more of a scavenging opportunity than it is a hunting opportunity. And if you get in on the end of it, you might be seeing the end of a aerial pursuit that ended up with the prey bird dropping to the ground. So they aren't big on eating squirrels. They aren't big mice hunters. They leave that to the beautios.
Chris, when I'm down the coast, I with some regularity see peregrine falcons and occasionally perched on the big water tower down at Hampton Beach, but I'm assuming they're a nesting pair in the area?
Well, how much time do you spend down there? Because I think
I'm
we're
not-
missing something in the Hampton Seabrook area, and my suspicion would be the Seabrook power plant. If I was going to pick a spot these birds might be nesting, there's enough ledges on that giant structure that they could be in there. We haven't seen peregrines bringing food towards that structure. We see them spending time on that water tower near the Hampton Beach. And we've seen 2 adults there this summer as well. But we haven't seen them interacting with young birds there, which you might expect that they would fly their young to that water tower and the young would sit there begging for food from the parents. We have not seen that. So I don't know if we're missing something or if it's not yet happened, but going to happen soon. We ought to take a cue from what's happened north of Plum Island and Newburyport and take a really good look at the underside of the Hampton Seabrook lift bridge as well. There's a chance that they might be there. They certainly are nesting on the bridge between Kittery, Maine and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and have been for more than a decade now. So
Good, thanks.
I'd ask one more thing about the egg evaluations of non-viable eggs. What other things besides the PBDE have been discovered?
Here's the problem. Analysis of egg contents is expensive, and we do not have the funds independently to do that in New Hampshire. So we are actually, we turn the eggs over to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're the ones that do the shopping around, but they actually looked for a project that wanted this sort of sample. I think the sample actually well, no, I take that back. I think there's probably still sample material that remains that is still in a freezer, which could go towards other sorts of chemical analyses. The issue at hand was what's going on with PBDEs. And so that was what the lab was set up to do, and that's what we allowed them to take samples for. Again, it's out of our hands now. It's those samples are with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That prompts me to think about following up on that and saying, are these still in good care? And could we find other ways to do some analyses? The issues of PBDEs and DDT seem to have retreated into the background a little, but we know our danger there. We're trying to figure out what our danger is with the PBDEs. That's the one where we're seeing bioaccumulation, but we're not sure what that means for animal and human health. So we're going to continue to watch that.
Thank you.
I appreciate everyone's interest in this. Let's see, in your local area, although there's no reason to think you all are from, there's a question. There's no way to know if you're all from the local area up there or not. Cathedral Ledge or Whitehorse is one nest site. If you go on the Kangamangas Highway, Painted Walls has been a nest site since 1990. There's another place called Woodchuck Ledge, which is west of Painted Walls. no, east of Painted Walls, excuse me. That's another nest site. Pretty good density of peregrines there. We haven't confirmed any at Square Ledge near Mount Passaconaway for a decade now. I can't imagine that they can't fly there, but we certainly haven't found them there. Frankenstein Cliff, another example in the upper part of the Mount Washington Valley. My gosh, there's a number of other potential sites that you might want to check out sometime. So if you do come across peregrines at any of these rock faces in the spring or summer months, especially if they're vocal or spending time flying around the cliff, New Hampshire Audubon would appreciate it if you just pass that information on, at least post it on New Hampshire Birds or on eBird, where we can find it out and then follow up. There's no reason to believe that peregrines won't continue to colonize some of these cliff sites in the years ahead.
All right. And Chris, actually, a question just came in through the chat stream.
Yeah, it came and went. I didn't get it. So
no, it just came through, and that is when the adults are feeding their young, do they regurgitate the prey or do they bring the whole carcass back with them?
Most of the hunting in peregrine falcons during the breeding season is done by the males. The females are bigger, they're better at defending the nest site, and during the time that they have young, they tend to stay near the nest, and the males do the majority of the hunting. Oftentimes the male will get its food to eat before it brings the food back to the nest. Typically, it will sever the head from the body of the bird, oftentimes consuming the nutrient-rich brains. Isn't this lovely? Mm. And then bringing the rest of the body back for the female and the, ooh, I see that, ooh, look at that. I'd say ooh too. And bringing the rest of the body back for her to divide up between her nutritional needs and the number of chicks that she has. They usually bring it intact. The female will oftentimes pluck most of the feathers off that carcass, because big feathers are not digestible by little chicks, and they're not digestible by adult falcons either. But you can imagine a long wing feather trying to go down the gullet of one of those baby chicks could end up badly. So most of the feathers get plucked off before feeding the young. And if there's not enough food demand when that red-winged blackbird comes in as prey, the female will then take the remains and she'll fly to another crevice on the cliff, oftentimes a damp, cool crevice, and she'll cache that food item there to guard against the risk that it gets foggy in the next 24 hours and the adult male isn't able to go out hunting. She's got food available to bring back and feed the young. So they plan ahead.
All right. Are there anyone else has questions? If you want to, last chance to put them in the chat.
Last chance.
Box or unmute yourself and ask Chris directly. Otherwise, Chris, thank you so much for presenting and sharing this information, and just, yeah, for joining us.
Well, I appreciate everyone sticking with it, and so glad to see all those familiar names and faces. Thank you